This is the Toocaa L2 laser engraver, and let me start off straight away with just saying that the build quality, documentation and packaging of this laser engraver is one of the best, if not the best, that I have reviewed so far. And if you want to see all the laser engravers that I've reviewed so far on this channel, there is a link to the playlist at the top of the video here. The L2 has an engraving area of 415 by 395 millimeters. This is the 20 watt version. They also have a 10 watt and a 40 watt option available as well. My package also came with an air assist and a honeycomb bed, and this costs £860 or about $1,100. Now make sure you carefully read what comes in the package that you're buying, because when I looked at their product images on their website, I assumed that the smart camera was included in all of the various different packages, but actually it's only included in the, I think it's the deluxe package, and that is $1,600. The silver thing that you see in the product images, and it's this thing here, is actually just the metal logo badge. It is actually where the camera goes. You can see that there is a hole for the lens and there are a few mounting holes to place it. But yeah, this is not the camera, it's just a badge. Let's go through the unboxing and setup. It's a little bit more involved than other laser engravers that I have reviewed in the past, and that is because it comes as a flat pack and you've got these panels that you need to put together. There are 6 panels in total. Yeah, it does take a little bit longer, but thankfully it is a very enjoyable and easy process because of the documentation and the level of detail that they have put into making sure that everything is labeled. And what stood out to me straight away was the quality of the materials. Just by picking them up and touching them, you can feel that they are premium. It's kind of hard to describe, but basically everything is rounded over. There are no sharp edges on the plastic panels here. I've cut myself on edges of plastic before like this. Everything is rounded over. All of the aluminium is nicely rounded over, and it just feels premium. I really liked the extra touches, such as the panels and the metal brackets here. They've actually labeled them and numbered them, and they've also put the stickers on the right side, so you won't get confused of what way to orientate them when you're slotting the plastic panels into these metal brackets. Little things like that that I have not seen on any other laser engraver that I have reviewed. It's hard to explain kind of why it feels more premium, but I guess even the anodizing, it's a really nice smooth satin finish. It reminds me of the anodizing that you get on like Apple products. So yeah, when I took this out of the box, I was overall very, very impressed. And another really small thing, but I really appreciate, is that, you know, things like the tapped holes, all of the threads have been cleaned, all of the holes have been deburred. So overall, it just makes for a very, very nice experience of putting this thing together. The documentation is very good. As I said, probably one of the best. I like the fact that everything is clearly annotated. The illustrations make sense. And I haven't seen this before in laser engraving documentation, but not only do they give you an illustration of what you should do, but they actually put next to it what you shouldn't do. So you definitely won't get confused when you are kind of assembling this, and there are quite a few parts to put together. The plastic panels, I think, is probably acrylic. These are 5mm thick, so they are very robust. It makes for a very, very nice sturdy enclosure here. And the combination of the orange acrylic with the silver anodized, I personally really like the look of it. I'm not sure how much of an important factor this is for some people, but it's got ample lighting on the interior as well, which just kind of makes it glow a little bit. It's quite a nice illuminated box to have in your room. After putting it together, I was almost tempted to not use it. It looked that nice. And as I said, the finish and the quality is really, really good. But obviously the downside to these kind of acrylic panels is they do scratch easily. Even if you've got debris on it and you wipe it with a cloth, it is going to leave scratches on it. This seems to be a little bit hard wearing compared to other plastics that I've tested in the past. It hasn't actually accumulated too many scratches, even though I've used it quite a bit, but it is definitely something you need to be wary of, because probably after a few years use, you know, it's probably not going to look as nice as this, which is a shame. And I just want to quickly pause this video to thank the sponsor of this channel, PCBWay. If you don't have access to the machines that you see in today's review, don't worry, you can still make laser engraved parts and many other types of parts, thanks to the huge range of fabrication services that PCBWay offers. Just upload the 3D model of your part and they will give you an instant quote, and you can have that part made usually in just 1 to 2 weeks. You can choose from a huge range of materials, finishes, and even tolerances. On top of all that, they offer low quantity orders, which is perfect for makers like us who just need those one-off prototypes. Don't let access to these type of machines hold back your ideas. Head over to PCBWay.com today and see how they can help you. Now, to control the L2, you have a few options. They have their own Toocaa Studio, which is a browser-based engraving software, which is a really interesting take on it. And I really did like the idea of this because it's just one less bit of software that I need to install on my laptop. And I've got 2 laptops, so that really does help to save me a lot of bother having to make sure that I've got this software installed on both of my laptops. The only issue is that I could not use it. I got it connected to Toocaa Studio. I selected the right port and it said that it was connected to the L2. I was able to kind of draw and add text within the browser. It's a really nice experience and it looks to be pretty well designed, but I just could not frame and I could not actually engage the laser to operate. So I'm not too sure what is going on there. It's a good idea, but at the moment, yeah, I couldn't get it working. Other ways to operate, of course, with Lightburn, which is what I use for all of my laser engravers. And also you got Laser Gerbil as well. Getting this set up in Lightburn was very easy. All you need to do is import the Lightburn configuration file. And that's it, just set the port and then you can start using it. So after putting together the enclosure and placing it on top of the gantry itself is pre-built. It's only the hood that you need to put together. I realized that there was actually quite a large gap on the bottom side of this enclosure. So really it's not an enclosure. This is more of a hood, and it was a bit of a surprise to me because I didn't maybe pay that much attention to the product images. You can obviously see that there is a gap in the product images, but I just, when I see an engraver like this with kind of a lid on it, I just assume that it's probably a enclosed machine. But yeah, this isn't really, which is a bit of a shame. It will protect you from the laser reflections and it will help with the fume extraction. You have a lid that opens and closes and it gives you ample room to maneuver parts in and out. There's also a magnetic kill switch on the side as well, which is very helpful. I'd recommend not overriding that feature. It does make framing a little bit of a longer process because you need to open and close it each time, but I think the safety is more important than just being a little bit quicker with framing. I have accidentally fired a laser before with an open frame machine. These type of safety features are very welcome with these type of engravers. Now, because these plastic sheets, as I said, they're quite thick and heavy, there are 2 gas struts that will assist in the lifting of the lid and it will keep it upright. This was definitely a nice addition because, yeah, you don't want this kind of crashing down. It's quite a lot of weight to it, so it was definitely a good choice to add these gas struts. So it looks really nice. The finish is very good. I guess the only downside to the hood is, well, it's just a hood. There are some things that you could do. I imagine you could bolt maybe a piece of wood or preferably a sheet of metal to the bottom of the gantry to close the engraver. You are going to lose some Z height though, because obviously this is on feet, which allows the gap at the bottom. There are also little bolt heads as well at the bottom, so it won't actually sit flush if you do attach it to some sort of a base material. So you'd maybe have to add some like weather stripping around the edge and then plonk it down onto like some sort of sheet. I don't know why Toocaa didn't add some sort of base to this to just make it an enclosed machine. It doesn't seem like it would really add that much to the cost of this machine, for just I don't know, a sheet of metal, for instance. So the machine comes with a 4-inch fan on the back here. I measured the airspeed and it was able to achieve an airspeed of 13 meters per second. When you do the calculations with a 4-inch fan, it comes to around about 223 CFM. I think it's definitely a good idea to go with a larger fan like this. You'll see a lot of the other models, they usually have like a 2-inch or a 3-inch fan. This is definitely preferable because you are going to need, a higher CFM to overcome obviously this big gap around the bottom of it. You're going to need a lot of airflow to create that negative pressure to make sure that you don't get those fume leaks. So as usual, I wanted to go a little bit deeper in testing the fume extraction of this engraver. I do feel this is one of the most important safety points of these laser engravers, is how well they deal with the fumes. Because we started off many years ago with the open frame machines, which were just absolutely terrible for your health because you just don't want to be breathing it in. So we did 2 tests. First is just a standard setup of using the L2 fan, connecting it to my ducting and just venting it straight out of the window. And then the other is connecting it to my own fume extraction setup, which is a inline fan and a fume filter. So we tested light engraving and cutting and also some more heavier engraving and some deeper cutting. Now I was actually quite surprised with the light engraving. This fan is actually producing enough negative pressure to not have any leaks. You can see that there are no spikes in particulates with the air quality monitor, and you can see the negative pressure that it's creating. You can see this footage here. I've got an incense stick just on the front of the enclosure, and you can see that the smoke is actually being drawn in, which is exactly what you want. You want that negative pressure to stop the fumes from leaking outside into the room. And obviously with my own setup, it's much more powerful. So yeah, it performed the same when we was doing light engraving and some light cutting. Things weren't so good when we started to do some heavier engraving and some deeper cutting, which produces a lot more smoke. You can see that the particulates spiked quite high in the room. So this fan is not enough when you're just venting it directly out of your window. Worse still is that even when I hooked it up to my own fume extraction setup and even putting it on its higher settings, because you've got this large open gap at the bottom of the engraver here, it wasn't enough, and we didn't see as high of a spike of particulates in the room, but it was still causing an increase in the particulates, so there was obviously some fumes being leaked into the room. So sadly, this is kind of what I expected when I put this together and realized that it was just, an open frame machine at the bottom of the engraver here. You're going to need a very powerful high CFM fan to overcome this huge gap that you got at the bottom. The setup that I've got is more aimed towards static pressure. I've got a centrifugal fan in the air filter, which is a lower CFM, but it creates a higher static pressure, which is what you want when you're pulling things through ducts and through filters. When you just want to move a lot of air and you don't have a lot of restriction, which is exactly like this setup, you would really want a high CFM fan. Something like an AC Infinity. If you maybe got a 10 inch or maybe a 12 inch, we're talking a very, very big fan here. That would probably be enough to overcome this. And obviously, you don't have to do heavy engraving, heavy cutting. If you're just doing light engraving, I'm talking about, just engraving images on top of plywood, for instance, and not really doing too much of deep cutting, which will produce a lot of smoke, you can probably get away with it. But yeah, if you plan to use this for all types of materials, which are going to produce a lot of smoke, you're going to need to definitely invest in some sort of good fume extraction. And as I said, there are ways around it. I think if you sealed up the bottom of this engraver, it would be a fully enclosed machine, and this fan might be enough for that. There is very little room for leakage if you seal up the bottom. The top is really nicely sealed. So moving on, the interface for the L2 is quite minimal. I think it's a little bit too minimal. All you've got at the front here is just one button. There is no label for that button. I'm still not really that sure of what it does. I think you can stop and start jobs. It's done that when I've pressed it. Also, you can rehome the machine, and that seems to be about it. I think it is definitely missing an emergency stop button. That button, it will stop and start, but it's always nicer to have just a bigger button that you can just smash in case of an emergency. And on the side, you've just got power buttons and you've just got access to the connection ports like USB and SD card. I'd really like to see some better controls. I think being able to control the LED, I think being able to control this fan, and also controlling things like the air assist. You've easily got space to add those controls at the front. And also one quick note about the fan that I didn't like is that there is really no way to control it. It just plugs directly into a socket. There is no switch on the wire, and as I said, there is no way to control the fan by using it on the machine. So basically, as soon as this is plugged in, it will start running, which is a little bit annoying. So what I found myself doing is just kind of pulling out the plug when it's not in use. But many times I would run a job and forget that it isn't plugged in. I'd have to plug it in. So overall, it would have been nice to see a little bit better integration with the kind of other accessories that you've got on the laser engraver. Now the laser itself, I'm not going to talk too much about what a 20 watt laser can do. There are many, many videos out there, and generally all of the laser modules that you see on all of these brands engravers are all pretty much the same. A 20 watt laser module from brand A is usually going to be identical to a 20 watt laser module from brand B. So I don't really get too in depth with what it can do because they all just do the same thing. It can cut through up to, I'd say 6mm ply. Ideally with a 20 watt laser engraver, you want to stick with, I think 3mm laser ply. That's usually going to be the material that you're going to be working with. It can cut through it in about 10mm per second, which is just a standard cutting rate that you get from these type of lasers. And it can cut through all of the typical things that a diode laser will cut through, paper, card, leather, some dark plastics, obviously various different types of wood. It can also make a mark on metal, not that deep of a mark, and it's obviously not going to be ideal for things like color engraving. If you want to do color engraving, you're probably going to want to be switching over to maybe something like a MOPA fiber laser. But 20 watts is okay for craft-based stuff. I think if you're looking to use a laser engraver for more functional things, when you're going to be wanting to use maybe thicker plastics and thicker plywoods, like a 9mm all the way up to like 18mm plywood, you really want to be looking at a 40 to 60 watt diode laser. The quality of the engraving is on par with pretty much all the other machines that I've tested in this range. You can expect to get engraving speeds of around about 120 to 150 millimeters per second. It really does depend on the size of your engraving, but you're going to be limited by the accelerations of this motor because it needs a certain amount of time to speed up to the full engraving speed. And if your line isn't long enough for that acceleration to reach the full speed, it will never reach that full speed, and therefore you will never hit those higher engraving speeds. And that is why generally you will see your job completion time kind of hit like a limit of around 150 to 200 millimeters per second. Any more than that and it's actually never going to be hitting those speeds because of the accelerations. These machines, they have accelerations of under 1000 millimeters per second. With the really high-end machines, you can expect 5000 to 10,000 accelerations. I mean, my Voron here, the 3D printer behind me, that does 5000 to 7000 millimeters per second accelerations very, very easily. This is just a common limitation with these type of diode machines, so bear that in mind. Sticking with the engraving quality, I tested the line width, and Toocaa are, to their credit, they are a little bit more genuine than some of the other brands. Brands will usually give under the absolute perfect conditions, the dot size that you can expect. It's incredibly unrealistic. Toocaa have gone a little bit unrealistic still. Their numbers are a little bit more closer to what I actually was able to document and what it is consistent with these type of models. Using an interval test in Lightburn, and where we start to see no more gaps in between the lines, we can kind of get an idea of the dot size. I use some anodized aluminium business cards here to engrave because you get a really nice contrast between the lines, and then by using my microscope I can see what type of line distance we got. It seems that we are hovering around 0.22 to 0.25, which is on par with other machines that I've tested in this price range, and also even more expensive machines that I've tested fall into this typical line width. And you can see this reflected in some photo engraving tests that I did. Here is an image engraved at 0.15, 0.2 and 0.25 millimeters. You can see around about 0.2 I think we hit a sweet spot between being able to get all of the tones reflected well in the engraving. You can see that in 0.25 we kind of lose the detail. 0.15 you can see that the shadows are just burnt out where the laser is actually going over the line again, which is burning more material, so you lose that detail. So 0.2 to 0.25 you're looking at around about 125 lines per inch engraving. Looking at the motion system, the Toocaa L2, it uses the same rail and the geometry that we've seen in some other recent reviews, in that it uses a kind of raised semicircular ridge for the V-wheels to run on, and this is all extruded in a single piece of aluminium. Now on higher end machines you'd usually see maybe like polished steel rods, or preferably would be linear rails, but the issue that I see with this type of design is that, well, first of all, it's not covered, so debris will get on it, and thankfully because this is quite a nice light silver, you can see the debris contrasting against that really easy, and you can see the kind of the gunk that is built up on this rail. Now thankfully this isn't as bad of an issue as some of my previous reviews, because the anodizing, as I said, is really, really nice. It's almost a smooth finish, and it does mean that it doesn't build up as much, and also it doesn't seem to produce as much as a raised bump when you are moving the laser module over those imperfections on that rail. And also it makes it much more easier to clean. I did find that on my previous review of the Creality, the anodizing surface was much of a kind of like a rougher grit, and it did mean that it did get into the anodized surface a little bit more. It did make it a little bit harder to get off, and obviously it built up a little bit more because of this. This I think is going to be much easier to deal with just with a wet cloth. You can wipe this debris away and keep it as clean as possible basically. Now something I did like to see was that the wire beams are actually protected, which is definitely a nice touch. It would have been nice if this gantry beam as well was protected, or at least cover the wheels. I think that would have been a nice option to have. I'm a little bit concerned that the rails, even though they are protected, it doesn't really look like there is an easy way to access the wire beams or the wheels. I really don't know what you would do. I guess you'd have to take off the entire thing because it is literally just enclosed in this aluminium beam, which just has a groove cut in it. So yeah, it would have been nice to be able to get a little bit of better access to clean those. And if we look at some line tests, we can see the issue with the debris building up on the gantry rail. You can see that there are just some really small imperfections in the line straightness here. This is much less evident than what I saw on other machines that I reviewed recently. So yeah, I do think that the anodized surface is a little bit of a saving grace with this, but this is the importance of cleaning the machine, because you know, over time it's going to build up and it's just going to result in more and more unevenness in your engraving. To be fair, this is under a microscope, so in real world you might not see it too much, but you know, overall just try and keep your machine as clean as possible when you are using it. Now my package did come with a honeycomb bed. I mean, there's not much to say about that. It's a honeycomb bed, it does its job, and also an air assist. And again, there's not much to say about that. It is a standard air assist that you will see in pretty much every single brand's packages. It does work, it does a good job. It's just a shame that it's not really that well integrated. As you can see, you just have to kind of like feed it underneath the machine, and this is the hose. It's not really routed into the laser module or along the gantry. So it would have been nice to have a little bit of better implementation for the air assist. So focusing the laser module, it has a pull-out lever to set the focus height, and then you have a dovetail rail and a wedge which will clamp the laser module in place. I much prefer this method as opposed to using screws to clamp it in place, because over time those screws, they will mar the aluminium because they're a harder material, and also using screws, it does throw off the alignment of the module a little bit. So this is definitely a better method, and it's much easier to have a flip out focus height because it's not something you're going to lose or misplace. So I think that covers everything. Overall, I was impressed with Toocaa's first machine. This is their first offering in the laser engraving world. The build quality, documentation is really what stands out to me with this machine. The hood is very sturdy and it looks very nice, but it is let down by the fact that it is an open frame machine essentially, which is kind of a shame because I think the way that the laser engraving market is moving, you know, it is moving more towards safety. We're seeing more and more safety features being introduced, thankfully, and rightfully so. And we're seeing more and more fully enclosed machines being released. So it's kind of a shame that they didn't follow suit with this. You know, obviously you can modify this to make it an enclosed machine. It wouldn't take too much work, but yeah, I just don't know why they didn't, you know, try and make this enclose or give you the option to enclose it. Obviously, if you don't care about breathing in fumes or you're maybe using this outside, and maybe it's not too much of an issue. I think 20 watts is sufficient for most craft-based materials. But as I said, if you want to be cutting, you know, thicker materials, 40 watt is probably where you want to start at. A few things I would like to see done with the next model that we see from Toocaa is probably going to be better integration with the accessories and the controls with the machine. I think that would be really good. And that would probably be it. Obviously the Toocaa Studio needs to be sorted out because I couldn't get it working. But apart from that, documentation, the build quality, and what you get is better, if not on par with a lot of the machines in this price range. I think if they included the camera in all the models, then this would be a really, really high competitor for, you know, one of the best in the sub 1000 range. Anyway, I hope that gives you some insight into this laser engraver. If you've got any questions about it, put it in the comments below. If you found this review useful, then please like and subscribe. It helps to spread these reviews to more people who may be interested in them, and it also allows me to carry on reviewing these machines. So anyway, that is it for today. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you later.